Virtual reality and augmented reality are two phrases you might hear a lot. You might be hearing things like VR is amazing for this, or AR is going to be huge. But what are they? Well, let's begin with VR. It's a computer-generated world or scenario that simulates an experience of any kind with the focus of realism. This environment is meant to be immersive. This word is used like crazy in the industry, as each and every person that makes something with VR technology wants their users to feel like they're in another place. Working with VR is to take someone to another space where they haven't been or want to go. From creating a lifelike experience grounded in reality, all the way to a Star Trek sci-fi world. VR technology takes advantage and uses as many senses as possible, simulating all that it can. It uses vision to limit or enhance sight, hearing to create an environment that surrounds you, as well as touch. Even though you may not be physically touching something, it reacts in the same way it would anyway. The only reason you keep hearing about VR and aren't able to experience it is because it's so expensive! While on one hand, one can make the argument for Google Cardboard, you really can't compare it to what virtual reality looks like, coming from an HTC Vive or Oculus Rift. If you're trying to get your hands on one of these headsets, you're looking at about $2,300 to $2,500. And that's with getting a computer just to run the goddamn thing. So if you're looking to experience it, you're going to need a lot of cash to throw away. But with VR on the rise comes AR, alternate reality, a technology that changes the world around you rather than taking you to a new place entirely. This tech has become even more desired nowadays, as there's no need to be taken somewhere else when you can just change your surroundings. Augmented reality systems can be considered a form of VR that layers virtual information over a live camera feed into a headset, or through a smartphone or tablet device. Both VR and AR are technologies that are taking over so many different industries, becoming more and more well known every day. Now that you know what it is, how does it work?
Oh hey, I didn't see you there. Did you ask how VR works? Because I'll tell you.
VR headsets incorporate many different tools to create an immersive and seamless experience for the user. The first and most important tool a VR headset uses to display information to its wearer would be the screen. The display on a VR headset is very important because it has to be a high enough resolution and have a fast enough refresh rate to make the user feel immersed. Some lower-end headsets turn the user's phone into a display, or even use LCD displays instead, while more expensive headsets like the Oculus Rift or HTC Vive use OLED displays. These displays are called stereoscopic displays, which means that there are two images being displayed at slightly different angles. This is then combined with Fresnel lenses. These are a type of segmented lens that are much thinner than standard lenses. Together, these two tools help create the illusion of depth and better immerse the wearer. Additionally, VR headsets make use of many different tools to track the user's head movements. VR headsets use a combination of gyroscope, accelerometer, and magnetometer to accurately track where the wearer's head is angled and shift the display accordingly. This helps immerse the wearer because it allows them to look around in a 360-degree environment. Additionally, the PlayStation VR headset makes use of 9 LEDs that are placed around the headset. This, in conjunction with an external camera, can accurately track the user's head. Next, we'll talk about motion tracking and player inputs. These are very important because they are what allow the user to interact with the game world. The Oculus Rift headset uses the Oculus Touch controllers in combination with Oculus sensors. These controllers have buttons, triggers, and thumbsticks that control different parts of the user's hand. The HTC Vive controller and Valve's Lighthouse tracking system work similarly to the Oculus sensor, in which two tracking stations are placed in the room which send lasers to hit the sensors on the headset and the controllers. This allows the system to detect the position of the user's head and hands. Finally, the PlayStation VR headset uses the optional PlayStation Move controllers to control the player's character in the game in conjunction with the PlayStation camera to track depth and the user's position. There are also more experimental editions being released for a VR experience, such as the Virtuix Omni or Infinideck, which are treadmills designed for VR. They allow the user to walk on them to control their character's movement. There's also eye tracking that's being developed by companies like Fove and Tobii, which use infrared sensors to monitor where the user's eyes are looking. This can be used to better simulate depth by focusing on what the player is looking at and blurring out the rest of the environment. In conclusion, VR technology is constantly advancing, whether it's through the displays being improved, better motion tracking being implemented, or finding new innovative ways of making the player feel more immersed in the environment.
Well, virtual reality brings to mind visions of futuristic simulations where users can experience things that they'd otherwise be unable to, or perhaps big brand endeavors such as the Oculus Rift. Virtual reality started decades earlier. The Viewmaster was constructed in 1939 by William Gruber, and though the premise seems simple by today's standards, it was rather innovative for its time. By using full-color 3D transparencies arranged in a circular fashion on a piece of thick cardboard or paper, the Viewmaster allowed users to look through a small headset. The user could then cycle through the various images, which were originally landscape photographs Gruber had taken. Current-day VR devices mimic the Viewmaster's goggle-like design, which encompasses the user's view in its entirety. By 1962, VR had started to emulate something closer to what we now recognize. The Sensorama simulator by Heilig was a small viewing device in which viewers could sit in front and watch a video. The Sensorama would then simulate touch, sight, hearing, and even scent. This stereoscopic first-person video and audio immersed the user, while the seat would rumble, mimicking sensations on screen. Chemicals were also used to simulate smells. However, the project ended up being too expensive to produce en masse and was eventually scrapped, though so-called 4D theaters have started to return to the market, featuring moving seats as well as fans that spraying water to add to the sensation of touch to an otherwise normal theater. After the Sensorama simulator, VR was primarily used in simulation in the professional field, where it has continued to thrive. This allowed pilots to practice flying planes in various conditions without worrying about the safety of their passengers, or for medical practitioners to hone their skills. It also found use in military and automobile industries, where the safety of human lives were at stake. In virtual reality, users could learn risky procedures without ever risking a life. In 1995, Nintendo attempted to bring virtual reality back into use with the general market with the reduction of their Virtual Boy. It was a tabletop console with a headset not unlike the Viewmaster's and offered a red stereoscopic display. However, it ended up being a commercial failure. Despite being marketed as virtual reality, the Virtual Boy was little more than an immersive screen, and its exclusive red-black display was notorious for causing headaches. Not to mention, it lacked the mobility of the Viewmaster, forcing the user to sit their face pressed to the Virtual Boy. Its biggest failing, however, was the lack of games available on the console, which forced Nintendo to quickly scrap the project. But virtual reality has come a long way since 1995. The most iconic current-day device for virtual reality is perhaps the Oculus Rift, produced by Palmer Luckey. It first got its start on Kickstarter, a site for crowdfunding, and quickly came to be one of the biggest names of the VR market. The Kickstarter started on August 1st of 2012. Palmer asked for $250,000 American dollars. In 24 hours, Palmer had raised $670,000. In 3 days, they had over $1 million. While complaints of motion sickness and its lack of movement tracking weren't uncommon, the first prototype of the Oculus Rift sold every single one of the 65,000 copies produced. A second version was announced shortly before the company was sold to Facebook and grew to become an even bigger success. While the Virtual Boy failed because it lacked games to play on it, the Oculus Rift had an opposite problem. Big-name companies such as Valve and Unity were pledging to provide all materials, engines, and support the Oculus team as needed. 6 years later, the Oculus Rift is still the biggest name in VR gaming, hosting a slew of AAA games such as Bethesda's Skyrim and Fallout, the former being one of the most successful games ever produced. The Oculus Rift's success inspired a slew of knockoffs, including the HTC Vive, which accomplishes a similar thing. In 2016, over 200 companies were reported to be producing their own VR projects. Notably was Google's Google Cardboard, which provided buyers with a simple foldable contraption not unlike the Viewmaster made of cardboard, and with the user's mobile phone, allowed for a simple, cheap VR on mobile that lacked the hassle of expensive material and the mess of cords that came with the Vive and the Oculus. VR is currently one of the biggest markets in the gaming industry, with every company scrambling to get out their own products and their own consoles. In 2018, the value of the VR market is predicted to hold a value of $12.1 billion US. It is also reported to reach a value of almost $40 billion by 2020.
VR is a very versatile form of technology in terms of its uses in today's society, but it's probably more versatile than you'd imagine. As most people already know, as of fairly recently, VR technology is being incorporated into mainstream video game media, as well as the movie and TV industry. But there's so many different streams of industry that VR has the capacity to affect with positive change, and new ideas are being innovated upon each and every day. For example, did you know that the fields of social science and psychology have begun to incorporate VR into their fields? VR gives scientists and psychologists a cost-effective solution to replicating specific interactions and experiments in a controlled and virtual environment. Bringing this kind of technology into a field such as psychology has its own layers of intricacy. Researchers found that virtual reality enables a completely new layer of perspective to be added to their scenarios, because the individual experiencing the virtual reality embodies the form of a virtual avatar, which is shown to give the individual a different experience from solely imagining oneself as their own personal form. Furthermore, this is developed into its own subsection of treatment known as virtual reality immersion therapy. Researchers have found that when individuals react with traumatic events in a rendered virtual environment, that it reduces fear responses, which then dulls the individual's traumatic stimuli to that specific situation. In other words, this opens up a whole new set of doors for those in the field of social science and psychology alike. In a more general sense, the idea of VR has been very appealing to the healthcare and clinical industry. VR has been involved in surgery training and has been effective in being a useful resource for medical students looking to get hands-on training and practice. This has been done by recording real operations using a 360-degree camera and combining that data with other sets of data to allow for a virtual/augmented world of the operation to be generated for educational, hands-on use. On a slightly smaller note, speaking of education, VR has taken on a role within high schools as well, especially within Japan. N High School in Japan is an online high school, and 73 students experienced the real-time opening ceremony for the school year from their homes with the help of VR technology. This was useful for them because of the distance they would have had to travel to experience the ceremony in person. VR can also be applied to little things such as this. Some of the fields I've talked about already are fairly new to the idea of VR technology, but companies such as NASA have been using them for the past 20 years. Most notably, NASA has been using VR in order for astronauts to experience immersive training whilst practicing for space travel while still on Earth. Combining VR with zero gravity may look silly, but it's undoubtedly practical when it comes to giving astronauts exposure to the environment outside of Earth's atmosphere. And touching on an influential but slightly more inappropriate note, an industry that has had much success with the rise of public interest in virtual reality technology is the adult film industry. This industry's business relationship with new technologies has thrived since the 1960s with the release of 8mm film, and continues to thrive now with the rise of the VR headset. VR technology's impact on society has truly covered many, many bases. In conclusion, VR's impact on today's society has been remarkable. The impact that virtual reality technology has had on real-world industries as well as society in general continues to become more prevalent and its potential more realized by the modern world at large. I personally am excited to see what the future holds for this truly unique technological tool.